Chapter 12. One more for the team. Ryan could feel the rage boil up inside him. This must be how Michael felt all the time. He wanted to scream at the top of his lungs until his throat was hoarse, to blow something up, to breathe smoke and gunpowder. He wanted to see the city burn. So close. They had come so close, and it had slipped through their fingers. They knew they were out there now. They knew they were coming for them. They would go into hiding, evaporate into thin air as if they never existed. This had been their one chance, and they had blown it. Unless... A chill ran down Ryan's spine. He tried so desperately to silence the troublesome internal monologue, but the idea had already firmly implanted itself in his brain. It was the only way he could keep them within reach of the crew. Keep them in plain sight. Ryan was driven by revenge, the hope of retribution. He wanted to make them suffer for what they'd done to him, to the crew, to Ray. If that meant putting himself in harm's way, then so be it. He only had his pistol and the knife in his belt. He checked the magazine and carefully counted the rounds, making sure to include the one in the chamber. Cautiously, he opened the door to the basement level of the car park. He could see a group of 7 people making their way to 2 vehicles. Together, they would easily be able to overpower him. He followed them, loudly and deliberately announcing over the comms, "I hear someone in the basement. I'm going after them." Predictably, they turned around. Idiots, thought Ryan. If we didn't know they were in our comms before, that would have just given it away. Jeff's voice cracked loudly in his ear. "Ryan, don't do anything stupid." "Trust me, Jeff. I got this." It was subtle, but the cue was there, and only the crew who knew him so well would have heard it. Jeff reluctantly acknowledged that he understood without giving anything away over the comms. Fuck. God damn it, Ryan. Be careful. Ryan fired off a few rounds in their general direction, counting them down as he went. The echo in the underground parking lot was deafening. A bullet impacted one, a girl, in the calf, and she stumbled forward, Ryan gaining on her. A few of the others stopped to help her up and fired back at Ryan. One of their shots hit home, hitting him square in the chest, his heavy body armor taking the brunt of the force, but it still hurt enough to take his breath away. They started to surround him, but he was quickly brawling his way into the bunch. Someone tripped him from behind, and he could hear a voice yelling to take him alive. Perfect. He knew he had to make it believable. He fired 2 more shots, seemingly wildly into the air in front of him, missing everyone except a concrete column, before pressing the muzzle to his own temple. Damn, that's still hot. "You'll never take me alive," he yelled, laughing hysterically, making sure the others could hear it over the comms. Cries from the crew rang in his ear as he pulled the trigger, praying he'd been accurate in his counting. Click. Internally, he breathed a sigh of relief. Outwardly, he let out a shocked gasp. "Oh shit, I'm out of ammo." The surrounding party laughed and laid into him, pummeling him with blows from blunt objects, fists, and feet. It didn't last long before one of the members had him at gunpoint. 2 others restrained him, while another took his pistol and searched him for weapons, removing the knife holstered on his belt and tucking it into her own. She pulled off his mask and was momentarily startled by his face paint, but collected herself to remove his communicator and crush it under her heel. Ryan struggled convincingly while they led him away and shoved him into the trunk of one of their cars, removing his boots, jacket, and body armor before tossing his mask back in with him and slamming the trunk closed. Without his communicator, Ryan couldn't hear Michael frantically calling his name, racing down the stairs just in time to see the cars speed out of the garage. "Ryan? Ryan! What's going on?" Jeff called over the comms. "Jeff, he's gone. They got him. Bastards!" Michael responded in a tightly controlled voice. In the trunk of the car, Ryan carried on for a bit, so as to not raise suspicions, kicking out at whatever he could, mostly making noise and trying to save his energy. After a while, he decided to give it a rest and focus on the movements of the car, trying to catch snippets of conversation, outside noises, and smells that might give clues to their location. Eventually, the car came to a stop, and he could hear the doors opening. Instinctively, he pulled his mask back on and curled into a defensive ball on his back, with his knees drawn up to his chest and his forearms over his face, hands clenched into fists over his head. That way, if they tried to hit him by surprise, he would sustain the least injury. Muffled voices outside the car were discussing what to do with him. He heard, "Leave him in the trunk, but someone keep an eye on it." Then he heard nothing. Ryan relaxed a little, unsure of how long he might be detained, starting to mentally prepare himself for what might come. It felt like hours had passed, but in reality it might have only been 20 minutes. He had no way to tell in the stuffy dark of the trunk, but eventually he heard footsteps and voices return. He curled into his defensive position again and waited. As soon as the trunk opened, a golf club came swinging in, striking his lower forearms, and he cried out in pain, but he was thankful he had been ready for it. Otherwise, it would have landed squarely across his chest. He held his palms open in surrender, but kept his arms up. A red welt was starting to appear on his arms. The fluorescent light outside was blinding. He squinted up to see the club stop mid-swing, and a pistol was aimed at his head, a gruff voice behind it saying, "Up. Now. No funny business." Brian complied, climbing carefully out of the trunk and stretching his legs. He was in an unfinished underground parking lot. By the sounds and smell of the place, it was likely near the docks of Los Santos. Ryan had noted there was a lot of construction going on around that area, so that fit the bill as well. "Shadles wants to see you." Ryan stiffened, but said nothing and allowed himself to be led into an almost bare, unfinished room. There was a chair, a low table with a black bag next to it, and a hook connected to a mechanical pulley system by the far wall, the sort that looked like it might be used to lift a motor out of a car, but that was all. The walls were rough concrete, the same as the floor, although there was a large, cheap rug in the center of the room that seemed remarkably out of place given the context of the situation. Unless they planned on using it to dispose of his body later. How cliché. "Shadles, meet the vagabond." Ryan was shoved violently forward, thrown off balance, and landed hard on his knees just as a figure stepped out in front of him. Ryan didn't move to get up, but noted the contrast between the worn steel-toed boots Shadles wore under the smooth gray fabric of suit pants. He glanced upwards. Three-piece suit. How fashionable. Shadles looked down at him curiously, but frowned almost disapprovingly. Ryan warily got back on his feet. Shadles was taller than Ryan, at least 6'3", and built proportionately, but he had a shockingly innocent face that looked like it would fit in with the lad's. Clean-shaven, wide brown eyes under neatly trimmed light brown hair, he radiated charisma. He was the kind of guy that if you bumped into him on the street, you'd like immediately, and that made Ryan extremely uncomfortable. "Hello, Ryan," Shadle said simply in an almost effeminate voice. "Ah, that's unsettling." Nobody outside the crew had ever called him Ryan. He was always the vagabond, and that's how he liked it. Keeping his persona separate, it made it easier to keep his guard up. "Sorry to keep you waiting. You caught us a bit off guard, you see. We weren't expecting, guests." He slightly hissed the word. Ryan resolved to say nothing, merely tilting his head slightly, which he knew made for a creepy display with his mask on. Shadles was unconcerned with it, though, peering through the holes of the mask to get a better view of his eyes underneath. "Yes, it's definitely you under there. I was a bit worried it might have been a decoy." He raised his eyebrows at Ryan, looking for a response. Nothing? No? Shadle sighed and motioned another, somehow even larger man over to his side. The remainder of the gang left the room. The large man held the length of rope and wore a wicked grin, like he was lucky to have been chosen for such a task. Ryan couldn't help but feel a little flattered, and for a second he considered making a joke about it, but thought better of it and continued to play it silent. All right, then. Well, I suppose you know what happens next. You can fight us if you want, but I can promise you won't win, Shadle said matter-of-factly. Ryan pondered the idea of taking them both down. He could probably do it, but then he'd have to take on the rest of the gang outside, who were armed and he was without body armor. That was also beside the point. Instead, he shrugged and reluctantly allowed the larger man to tie his hands in front of him with the smooth nylon rope. He was led to the far wall, and his hands were secured to the hook that was connected to a hoist overhead. The larger man activated the mechanical hoist, drawing Ryan's arms above his head, painfully stretching his already bruised ribs and pinching his shoulder where the bullet had grazed him previously. He was forced up onto his toes, and then the hoist stopped, leaving him balancing precariously. There was a wall behind him, but it was just far enough away so that it offered no support. Shadles motioned for the other man to leave the room. He hesitated for a moment in the doorway, looking worried. You know we still need him alive. Don't worry, I'm not going to kill him, Shadles reassured him and sauntered back over to Ryan. Yet. He smiled, and it was eerily welcoming. Now, the infamous vagabond, are we going to have some fun?